I got to sit in front too. I can't see. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. Good evening. You got it? Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everyone. Good evening. The reason we're using a microphone is for the sake of our live stream. So if you're looking for a speaker, there is none. Right. So I'd like to introduce, and actually before I introduce Mr. Cahill, I do want to alert you to the Wantagh Guidance Department website, of which we have many tabs. One tab is very important to, I think, this audience, would be our scholarships webpage. December and January is when we get the bulk of them. I'll get a scholarship every 3 or 4 days. We'll vet that scholarship if it's legitimate, and many of them we've seen in the past, so they are, and we'll put it on that website. And some of them are very specific, and some of them are very general. Some of them pertain to specific colleges, and some of them do not. So it really, it bears your perusal. So I hope that you do that. And so tonight we're going to discuss financial aid. We're going to try to save questions for the end, but I'll have Mr. Cahill handle that, and let me hand it over to Mr. John Cahill of WMS Financial.
Thank you very much, Frank. It feels awkward to speak into a microphone and not hear it project, but I do what I have to do. That's fine. Thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Once again, I'm John. Please don't call me Mr. Cahill. Mr. Cahill is my father, and he's 91 years old, and he's still with us. So if you call me Mr. Cahill, I just immediately look for my father. He's not here tonight, clearly, obviously. But that being said, thank you for coming out tonight. I appreciate it. Before we get started, I want to just get a show of hands first. How many of you are parents of seniors? Okay. How many are parents of juniors or younger? Okay, so it's about a 50-50 split. Good. All right, so not everybody that's here is in a panic, and not everybody that's here has a lot of time on their hands. So I'm going to go over some things here that it's going to be geared towards both the younger families and for the current families that are in their senior year and are going through the process already. So rest assured, I will take care of you. As Frank said, please, if you can, everybody should have received a packet. If for any reason they didn't, Elena, my assistant over there, has some blue folders for you. In that, there is note paper, and we think we have some extra pens as well. Please jot down your questions and write them down on that note paper and save them to the end. It's 7 o'clock on a Tuesday. I realize and I value your time, and I realize some of you probably may not have even been home yet. You came directly from work. You want to go home. You want to see the wife, the kids, the husband, the dogs, whatever it might be, and you maybe want to eat dinner. So I'm going to be as quick as possible tonight, and I'll save that Q&A for the end. So if you don't want to stick around until for the Q&A, you can scoot out the door. But if people start asking questions during the presentation, it tends to bog it down, and next thing you know, they're serving breakfast in the morning, and we don't want to still be here at that point in time. Okay, so I'm going to get right into the presentation. So can anybody tell me what it is that we're looking at up on the screen here? Just blot it out. This is one time I don't mind you just blotting out. Blurt it out. It's a campus. Okay. More specifically, that's SUNY Geneseo. It's one of the top colleges in the state university system, and it's absolutely beautiful up on the Finger Lakes. Beautiful. Okay. That's SUNY Geneseo in July. That's SUNY Geneseo next week. Now, it is a little bit of a joke, but it's meant to drive home a point, and that point is that when you're looking at colleges for your sons and your daughters, going to see them during the summertime isn't going to give you a great idea as to what the school is going to look like when they're on campus. Okay, if your son or daughter doesn't like the cold weather and you go see a school like SUNY Geneseo, when it looks like that, they're not going to think anything of it. But when you realize that by Thanksgiving and later, some of those areas up north, they're not exactly going to be nice and sunny and warm, okay? So go and look at the schools when they're in session. Not only will you get a better idea as to what the weather is going to be like when they're on campus, but you're going to get a better idea as to what the student body looks like. I have two daughters who are in college. My younger daughter, when she was looking at the school that she's at in southern Mississippi, it was in August. You can imagine how hot it is in southern Mississippi in August. You can swim through the air. It's amazing, the humidity. But we went to see this campus, and despite the fact, I'm sorry, it was actually late July, the fact that it was still going to be hot, we knew that, there weren't a lot of people on campus, so we didn't see the breakdown of it, so it was sight unseen. So here I was the barber with the bad haircut. I was giving everybody this advice to look at the campuses when they're in session, and my own daughter looked during the summertime when it wasn't. Thankfully, it worked out for her, and she really did like the breakdown of the campus. But the point is, try and go see it when school's in session. I know it's more difficult to do so, and it's a lot easier to go during the breaks, but you really don't get an idea as to what the school's going to look like. Okay, so if you can't see this, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly. What does college really cost? For 24 or 25, this kind of gives a little bit of a breakdown of the different types of schools, and I'm going to get out of the other people's way. I'm kind of mosey onto both sides over here. So if you look over here, this gives you a breakdown of the 4 different types of schools. You have your public 2 years. That would be like your Nassau, your Suffolk Community College, Queensborough, something along those lines. Then you have your public 4 years. This is not specific to any state, but in our state, obviously, we'll look at it as a SUNY. And then you have public 4-year out-of-state schools. These would be your Penn States, your UConns, UMass, things along those lines. And then you have your private nonprofit schools. Again, this is just an example. It's not specific to any one school. Some can be higher, some can be lower. So it gives you a little bit of an idea as what the average cost would be. Yes, there are schools that are above $90,000 a year, but there are also private schools that are in the $40,000 a year range, hence the reason that it's an average. What is the breakdown, and what is the biggest part of any of those costs? Well, as you can see, in the private schools, it's tuition. At the out-of-state schools, it's tuition. At your in-state schools, it's the room and board. That's more expensive. And then for in-states or public in-states, there's not really as much in the way of dorms for a lot of students. However, anybody that's looking at a SUNY school, I looked at that at Geneseo before. Room and board costs about $15,000 to $18,000 at a SUNY school. Tuition and fees, $8,500 to $10,000, depending upon the school. So you're actually paying more for those sloppy joes and a bathroom and a bed than you are for the education itself. Crazy as it sounds, that's what the breakdown is. And then there's other different categories in there. Other expenses, that's hair care products, it's going out to eat, it's things that you're spending now already anyway. They're just translating over to when they go to college. Transportation to and fro. That can be a big piece of the puzzle. I have a daughter, as I said, who's in southern Mississippi. We do not go and pick her up for a 2-day weekend. We do not drive to pick her up. She has to fly home. So the further that your son or daughter decides to go away, that piece of the puzzle is going to expand even more. And then you have books and supplies. Books, I know, are tending to trend downward. More and more, everything is electronic. People aren't buying as many textbooks as they used to, but there are still supplies that are involved. And then you have your housing and food, tuition and fees. Obviously, your housing and food can vary. If you live off campus, you can save a lot of money. I have another daughter who is off campus down at Rowan University in New Jersey, and it's costing us probably about $5,000 less than it would to live on campus. However, that's not always the case. If you take an area like Boston, go to Boston College. The off-campus housing is more expensive than the on-campus housing. Why? Because the area is extremely well-to-do. Okay. The average cost of a private college for 4 years is more than $60,000. Again, that's probably the average. That's low, especially when you look at some of the top schools out there. Let's look at what colleges cost and what students and families paid for them in 2024, the most recent year that we have the numbers for. Okay, so it might be a little hard to read, so I'm kind of got to give a little bit of a breakdown for you. So after adjusting for inflation, tuition increases have actually slowed over the last couple of years. Amazing. They have slowed. Now, these numbers go back to 94, 95. I could bring those numbers back to 1945 if you really wanted, and the average increase was typically between 5 and 6% per year. Ever since the implementation of the GI Bill after World War II, tuition increases went up by 5 to 6% per year. However, over the last couple of years, they have actually begun to slow down slightly, ever so slightly. You can see that kind of curve's going down. Same with publics, and when I say going down, I don't mean that the costs are going down. They're just not rising quite as fast, okay? Excuse me. And the source is from College Board, okay? And again, gives you a breakdown, public 2-year, public 4-year, and private. This doesn't break out of state and in-state because it's taking everybody into consideration, okay? How is a family supposed to pay for an education? Savings? Well, I'm going to venture a guess to say that most of you here tonight don't have this top category all worked out where you can pay for an education out of pocket. Because if you did, you probably wouldn't be here, and that's okay. Are they supposed to borrow for education? Are they supposed to hope for scholarships? I heard Frank talk about the scholarships before. Scholarships are great, but they're not guaranteed, and depending upon the school, some schools don't even give them. Now, this is the other one. The last two I really like. Are you supposed to go to a lesser school? Well, if your son or daughter's worked their rear end off to go to college and done really well in high school, and now you're going to tell them, well, we can't afford it, or we're going to have to go to a cheaper school because we just don't have the money for it, and it's not up to their abilities, well, that's a hard conversation to have with them. And then not go at all. Not go at all, that's not really an option. We used to say, and the numbers have changed somewhat, but we used to call college the $1 million gift. What that meant was that the average earnings for a college graduate over a high school graduate over a lifetime was $1 million greater than the high school. It's probably going to change with the implementation of AI. So if your son or daughter wants to become a plumber, don't turn them down, because those jobs are not going away. Okay, how are you supposed to pay for college? And don't worry, for those of you that want to talk about the FAFSA and the other forms, we're getting to that. In 2023-24, the average undergraduate received, this is a kind of a breakdown of the aid, and this is for everybody. Again, this is privates, publics, everything. People who are well off and people who need all kinds of aid. $16,360 was the average financial aid package across the country for every school. Again, it's going to be much greater at some schools and much lower at other schools. The vast majority of what they received, of that portion, 11,610 of that average, were grants. What is the good thing about grants? They do not need to be repaid. It is, in essence, a reduction of tuition. When you receive a grant, you're not actually receiving it. You do not get a check for that money. It is just a reduction in the tuition and fees, okay? Another portion of that was federal loans, and then education tax benefits. These are really more for the parents than they are for the student. Doesn't come off your bill, but you could save money on your income taxes by getting education tax benefits. And then last is work study. Very small portion of it. I'll spend a little bit of brief time on work study. Work study is an on-campus job that your son or daughter is offered through their financial aid package, and it is need-based. You have to have a financial need to qualify for work study. For those of you that think, well, I don't want my son or daughter to work while they're in college. I want them to really study hard. There's a reason it's called work study, because you might get a job for 10 hours a week in which you do 9 hours of studying in the library and 1 hour of putting books back. That's what it's designed to do. But it doesn't reduce your bill. It kind of prevents you from having to send them as much money during the semester. And let me tell you something. For those of you that do not have any children in college, when you get to the point when your children are in college, you will become an ATM. They will be reaching out for you for money all the time. So if they can get a work study job, the ATM might go down slightly. It does help. Okay, so who's receiving aid? So in 21-20, in 21-22, the last school year which these stats were published, 82% of first-time, full-time students at public four-year schools received some form of financial aid. At private colleges, it was 87%. Okay, some form of aid. What does that mean? It doesn't necessarily mean that they were receiving all kinds of grants and scholarships. It could be federal loans. But it does mean that they were receiving some form of help. The good thing is that that's a pretty small percentage of people that don't receive something in some way, shape, or form. Okay, here's another thing. Aid from colleges is growing at a much greater rate than it is from state and the federal government. The numbers for the state TAP grant haven't gone up in 20 years. The number's been $5,000 for the last 20 years. The federal Pell Grants have gone up slightly, but they've only gone up about $1,000 to $1,500 over the last 20 years, whereas your institutional grants have gone up significantly greater than that. And that's why you see this blue line. There's two blue lines here. You got a dark blue line at the bottom and then a lighter blue line at the top. The amount of institutional grants at those public four-year schools have increased by 134%, and at the privates, it's a 95% increase. That's over the last, say, 15 years. The sources of aid from the state and from the federal government have actually stayed about level. Okay, this is the depressing one and distressing, although I think I know why. Okay, FAFSA completion rates fell in 23-24. For the first time, they significantly dropped. Now, gee, I wonder what occurred that year in 2020, okay? After that, they continued to decline because schools were shut down. There were no residents on campus at a lot of colleges, and people just didn't go for that short period of time. But then, in 2023, there was a significant drop-off from 51% of people, eligible people to file a FAFSA, went down to 43%. Now, anybody already have kids in college? Okay, so you filled out a FAFSA before? How long have you had kids in college? 1 year, 2 years, 4 more? 2 years, 3 years, okay. So here's why I'm going to tell you that this is hopefully an aberration. In 2023-24, the Education Department released an upgraded, quote-unquote, FAFSA. They completely redesigned the FAFSA website and the process of doing so. As with most things with the federal government, whenever they fix something, they break it in the process. I believe Ronald Reagan once famously quoted that if the federal government was put in charge of the Sahara Desert, they would run out of sand in 10 years. In this case, they actually made the wheel square when they did it. For anybody that filed a FAFSA in 23-24, it was an absolute nightmare. And the reason being was because that redesign, despite the fact that the original Education Department decree was filed in 2017, it took them 6 years to release this, 6 to 7 years to release it. They still screwed it up. You would file a FAFSA, you would get a congratulations, your FAFSA was completed. You'd get an email 2 to 3 days later that says, congratulations, your FAFSA was completed. And then 30 days later, you'd get an email that said, your FAFSA is missing a signature, or your FAFSA has not been filed, or there's no FAFSA on record. They were deleting random FAFSAs. They were all kinds of issues to the point where, I don't have a lot up top here, but a lot of that left in 23-24 because my hair was falling out because of all the issues that the FAFSA was having. Thankfully, they were able to get it rectified the next year. I'll give you an example. The FAFSA has been available for the last 10 years on October 1st. That year, they shifted it to January 1st. By April 1st, they were still having tremendous issues. Those issues did not get resolved until last year. Thankfully, they seem to have all the kinks worked out now. But people got distressed. People got frustrated, and they gave up, and they didn't do it. That's distressing. If you think you're going to be eligible for any kind of financial aid or any kind of federal student loans, you must complete the FAFSA. And that's a big problem. Hopefully, that's resolved. Okay, so who's eligible for financial aid? Here's some myths and reality that we have here. Most people, the first thing that they think is their income is too high. Well, that might be the case, but it might not, because your income being too high at a SUNY school might not be the case at a school like Quinnipiac, or a school like Fordham, or a school like Harvard. Very different. Oh, I own a home. I'm not eligible for financial aid. Completely incorrect. Your own home, the home that you live in, does not count against you for federal financial aid purposes. Your grades are too low. And again, financial aid is not dependent upon your grades. If you want to talk about academic scholarships, that's a completely different circumstance. However, financial aid is not dependent upon the grades. Of course, you have to be able to get into the school, but so long as you can get into the school, if there is a need, your grades are irrelevant to the equation. Aid is only for special groups. No, it's not. It's for everybody who qualifies. It's an easy process. Well, in reality, the FAFSA has become easier over the last several years. Once they got the bugs worked out, it actually did become somewhat easier. However, there's another form we're going to discuss tonight that didn't become any easier, or that school people can help. This is an interesting one. And Frank and I were just funny, we were discussing this before. When I say school, I don't mean Wantagh High School or the staff here. I don't mean the high schools at all. What I mean is the colleges themselves. This is not a damnation on anybody that works for a college or anything along those lines. However, oftentimes, going to the college for them to help you with your financial aid and complete your financial aid forms is akin to going to the IRS to complete your tax returns. Does anybody do that? Did you know the IRS will help you with your tax returns and get it done for free? Does anybody want to do that? Why not? Of course not. They're not going to tell you about all the loopholes, and you're going to pay as much as you can in taxes. Funny thing about this, school people that can help. I do several different school districts across Long Island and Queens. I had a meeting with somebody last week who was from a different district here in Nassau County, and the woman that I was talking to was a financial aid counselor at Queensborough Community College in the city. And I was flabbergasted. I'm like, what do you need to speak to me for? And her response is, most of the people that I deal with have full need and are getting full kind of financial aid. She said, my son needs to fill out the CSS profile, and I have no idea what I'm doing with that. Okay, we'll get to the profile in a minute. Okay, how much aid is available for financial aid purposes? Close to $400 billion for all the schools across the country. That's also tax relief. Remember I mentioned before the parents can save money on their income taxes when their children are in school, possibly. That is what's available. If you know where to get it, this is just a breakdown. Roughly $282 billion of that is student aid, and then the rest of it is student, parent, and tax aid. Okay? How do they determine if you're eligible for financial aid? So now it's just kind of the meat and potatoes of how the financial aid system works. So, up here, it's a simple formula. You want to jot it down, feel free to do so. COA, cost of attendance, minus student aid index equals need. So, COA, cost of attendance at school. That includes tuition, books, room and board, tuition and fees, things like that. Does not include transportation and so on and so forth. That's going to be varied from school to school. It doesn't matter if you're looking at Hofstra or you're looking at SUNY Old Westbury. Those numbers are going to be vastly different. Student Aid Index, SAI, that stands for Student Aid Index. This is the new number that when they made the change to the FAFSA, that they changed the old system. It used to be called an EFC, or an Expected Family Contribution. All they did was change the name. They really didn't do anything. So it's just, now it's the Student Aid Index. The Student Aid Index is determined by the FAFSA. When you file your FAFSA application, at the end of the FAFSA, when they process it, a week or so later, it'll spit out a number called a Student Aid Index. That's determined by the parent's income, the parent's assets, the student income, and the student assets. That's a rather large formula condensed into the Cliff Notes version, but suffice to say those are your main drivers in the Student Aid Index. So if you take your cost of attendance and you subtract your Student Aid Index from that, if your cost of attendance is here and your Student Aid Index is here, you have a need at the school and you qualify for financial aid. Now, if your cost of attendance is here and your Student Aid Index is here, you do not have a need. But different schools, different needs. You have to remember that. It's not the same in every one. This one varies. Cost of attendance varies from school to school. This does not. That stays the same. Need is how much aid you're eligible to receive. Doesn't mean you're going to receive it. It means how much you're eligible to receive. Okay, so where do you get your money from? Federal financial aid. Federal government provides Pell Grants, which are pretty much for the destitute. Okay, you have to have a very low income to receive a Pell Grant. And the Pell Grant's maximum amount is slightly under $8,000. It's also a sliding scale. You can receive a $1,000 Pell Grant, or you can receive a full Pell Grant, or somewhere in between that number. It's based on income and assets of the parents and the student there again. SEOG, Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. Again, another federal grant that's available to people with low income. Here's the crazy thing about it. Pell Grants are available at any school in the country. SEOG grants are not. You have to check to see if the schools actually have them available. Crazy, right? College work study, covered that a little bit before. This is need-based. So you do have to have a financial need. Your cost of attendance has to be above your Student Aid Index to get college work study. If not, I've had people, well, can I get college, can I get work study? Well, no, you don't have a need. Well, yes, I do. Not according to the government, you don't. Okay? But again, it is a good thing to have if you can get that. All right. Another source from the federal government is subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford loans. These are what you would call, and what most people would refer to as a true student loan. Under the subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford loan programs, the student can borrow up to $5,500 as a freshman, $6,500 as a sophomore, and $7,500 each year for junior and senior year. That's it. But they do not require a cosigner. Why? Well, the federal government is the borrower, is the lender in this case. They are the cosigner. However, you're capped at $27,000. That's 55, 65, 75, and 75. That's what they're eligible to receive from the federal government. No cosigner. And it's applicable at any school out there. What's the difference between subsidized and unsubsidized? Hey, that's a great question. I asked my own question. A subsidized loan means that the government is paying the interest while your son or daughter is in school. So, if you receive a $5,500 Stafford loan for a freshman, it's going to be broken up into two pieces. If you have a need, you can get up to $3,500 of that in subsidized money and $2,000 in unsubsidized money. That $3,500 will still be $3,500 when they graduate. Even if they go to grad school and go and become a medical doctor, it will still be $3,500. They do not backload the interest. They do not accrue interest until they stop going to school half-time or greater. That's it. So it's not necessarily graduate. It's when they stop going to school. The unsubsidized loan, on the other hand, will start accumulating interest after disbursement. That loan will start. It's like a credit card that you don't pay. It will start accumulating. Now, again, the rates tend to be more favorable than other types of loans out there because the government is the backer of that loan. I don't suggest that you don't take it because the interest is accumulating. The rates are lower, but it's still a pretty good idea to take that if you can. Parent Plus loans. These are changing, okay? But as for now, I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of what they are today and what they're anticipated to be in the future. Plus, PLUS, is an acronym for Parental Loan to Undergraduate Student. That means it's your loan, not your son's or daughter's. You take out that loan. Unlike the subsidized and unsubsidized Stafford loans where there's no credit check for the student, the Plus loan does have a credit check. However, so long as you have mediocre credit or better and no chargebacks or missed payments or something along those lines, if you have a 650 credit score, you'll get approved. If you have an 850 credit score, you'll get approved. But your rate will be the same as the person with the 650 credit score. Currently, those rates are just under 9%. Not cheap, okay? As of the current rules, a Plus loan can be used to pay the difference in education. So if your school costs $90,000 and you get $20,000 of aid and you want to take out a $70,000 Plus loan and have the credit to be able to take out that loan, as of now, the Department of Education will let you take that money out. Here's the other however. Starting in 2026, so probably the school year after this, by the time they finally get it all worked out, the Plus loan numbers are going down to $20,000. They're no longer going to be unlimited. Now, is that $20,000 per parent? Is it $20,000 per household? Little unclear on that as of yet because it hasn't been implemented. Now, some people might panic and say, well, that stinks. I can't borrow enough to pay for my son or daughter's education. Remember, this is just federal sources. There are other routes to do it. It's not the worst thing in the world, and here's why. We've had people come into our office that have upwards of $400,000 in parental loans for their sons and daughters as they're going into retirement. Most people want to have their mortgages paid off by the time they get into retirement or close to it, but now all of a sudden they're stacked on there with $400,000. The way that the rules are now going to be written is that hopefully it's going to prevent people from being in that situation where they've overspent to the point where they can no longer afford it in retirement. Also, now, again, we saw the sort of tuition increases going down. The access to easy money, whether it was federal Stafford money or Plus loans, has allowed colleges to continue to raise costs at that rate, at those ridiculous rates, and keep raising rates. Hopefully, without access to that money, it might actually cause the colleges to lower some of their costs. We'll see how this shakes out. I don't know. Again, I'm just pontificating here. I don't know exactly how it's going to work out. You could also see some schools go under because a lot of schools rely on those loans to meet their operating budgets and expenses. Okay, state government. So in this case, we're going to focus on New York State. So New York State has in-state programs that are specific to New York residents going to schools in New York State. Not necessarily state schools, but they just have to be in the state. Some are specific to state schools, and I'll go over those. So you have Tuition Assistance Program, commonly known as TAP. TAP is an award that's up to $5,000. It is need-based. If your family has $125,000 or lower of New York State taxable income, you're eligible for TAP. It doesn't mean you'll get $5,000. Again, it's prorated and it's on a sliding scale. It does not need to be repaid. It is not grade-based unless your son or daughter really bombs out. If they get below a 2.0 GPA, then something called SAP kicks in, which is called Satisfactory Academic Progress. If you fall below that level, they can cut the TAP. So despite the fact that it is need-based, there is still a grade component to it. And it is also limited to 4 years. You can't receive it for longer than 4 years. Next is the New York State STEM Incentive Program. This is not a grant. It is a scholarship. So if you have a son or daughter who is interested in going to a New York State school, or SUNY or a CUNY, and they are going to be going for a STEM degree, science, technology, engineering, and math, and they are in the top 10% of their graduating class, they can have their tuition and fees paid for, okay? There is a stipulation. You do have to stay in the state for as long as you receive that award after graduation, okay? You don't have to work for the public. You just have to basically pay taxes in the state for that period of time. If you renege on that and you leave, it reverts, it becomes a loan, okay? Limited scope of people who get that because you do have to be going for STEM and you do have to be in the top 10%. Oddly enough, I'll ask this question of everybody. Science, technology, engineering, and math. Would you think that like healthcare would be part of STEM? You would think it would be, right? I mean, it's in its nature. Patient care doesn't qualify for the STEM. So if you want to become a nurse or a physical therapist or a doctor who sees patients, it doesn't count. However, if they're going to be a research doctor and never see patients, they can get it. They want to be an HVAC tech, that qualifies as STEM, okay? I know. There's a list if you want to look it up for your son or daughter that is a professions that do qualify for that. Next is the Excelsior Scholarship. Again, this one's kind of weird because it's not really a scholarship. This is need-based. The Excelsior Scholarship covers the cost of tuition at a New York State SUNY or a CUNY school for those making $125,000 or lower of federal adjusted gross income. But that's family income. So if your income is $124,000 and your daughter makes $2,000, you just lost out on the Excelsior Scholarship. That is good for 4 years. However, stipulation similar to STEM, you have to stay in the state. In the case of the Excelsior Scholarship, I believe it's 5 years, again, or it reverts to a loan. It's not based on academics. It is based on need and need only. The Enhanced Tuition Award is the private school version of the Excelsior Scholarship. So, for example, like Adelphi has that. It's partially funded by the state, and it's partially funded by the school. Here's the difference. Every SUNY and CUNY school uses the Excelsior and has to accept it. Not every private school uses the Enhanced Tuition Award. So, for example, Adelphi uses it, St. John's doesn't. Neither does Malloy. You have to look. There is a list of schools that's published every year, and it does change, okay? Are you eligible? Again, same thing. It's the numbers here on the Excelsior and the Enhanced, $125,000 of combined family income, okay? Oh, I'm sorry, one quick thing. The STEM scholarship doesn't matter what your income is. You could make $10 million or you could make $10. It's irrelevant. It's only based on the grades of the student, top 10% of their class. So this is a big piece, and we talked about this before, how about more of it is actually coming from the colleges and universities. Private universities have endowment funds outside of federal and state funds. Depending upon the schools that you're looking at, your top schools in the country, Harvard comes to mind, has a $50 billion, with a B, $50 billion endowment fund. They could afford to never charge tuition, fees, room and board again, and barely scratch the surface of their endowment fund. And then it goes down from there. If you look at some public schools, they could be in the tens of millions of dollars. However, the private universities tend to have much larger endowment funds than the states because the states are funded by the state itself. They're awarded on a first-come, first-served basis. So once the money's gone, it's gone from those endowment funds. They can and do give preferential treatment to students who are in the top 25% of applicants, because despite the fact that some of that money might be in the form of grants, need-based grants, some of it's in the form of merit-based scholarships. Merit-based scholarships can be performance-based. That could be academics. It could be athletics. It could be artistic, anything along those lines, okay? And then private sources. So a lot of people come to me and they say, well, we want to look outside. Do you recommend any scholarship searches out there? My response is no, I don't. And there's a reason why. Unless you have something very specific to your family circumstances, you're a member of a local union or the Hibernian Society or you name it, something where your employer maybe provides, has scholarships available. Most of the money that you're going to, or most of the time that you're going to spend, you're going to be chasing crumbs, because about 2% of all the money that's available in private, of all that $400 billion, only about 2% of that is actually from private source scholarships. Now, if you have something that's very specific to you, take advantage of it. Absolutely, you should do that, but it's really rare. Funny story. So going back about 15 years ago now, I had a student who applied for a scholarship through Wendy's. Yes, the fast food restaurant Wendy's. They had a scholarship at the time. Everybody who applied got a free Frosty. Not a bad deal. It was a simple, whatever. You put your name down, and they gave you a coupon for a Frosty. He went through 5 levels. 5 levels. Each time, he got a different meal for going through this. It took 8 levels for it to become monetary. There were 5 scholarships across the country of $10,000. Not bad, but you had to get to 10 levels to get to that top scholarship. And they got increasingly more difficult to go through the level. Essays, reasons why, and so on and so forth. So I think he got like a, Whopper, well, not a Whopper, but the Baconator, that was it. It was a Baconator and a Frosty, and then they finally realized that it was a waste of time to do that. But again, if you have a union or something along those lines, absolutely take advantage of it. There are some apps out there and some services that are inexpensive to use. If you have the time and you want to just at least look at them, go right ahead. Oftentimes, the colleges themselves will provide to you a list of what is available through the school, and they'll even tell you what you need to get that scholarship. That's different. The vast majority of the academic and performance scholarships that you're going to receive are going to come from the institution themselves. Here's the other kicker, okay? Private source scholarships, depending upon the dollar amount, can actually reduce your other award from a school. So think about that. You spend hours filling out applications and doing essays for a scholarship to get a $5,000 scholarship. And when you notify the college of that scholarship that you just received, all of a sudden they take away $5,000 of grant money. Why is that? Now, again, not every school does this, but they don't allow for stacking of outside and inside and private source scholarships. So oftentimes they'll take that money away. Now, my daughter won the Girl Scout Gold Award a number of years ago, and she was a big softball player, and she won a $1,000 scholarship from a local softball organization that they give out every single year in memory of a player that had played for that organization that tragically died back in 2019. The amount was $1,000. The check was made payable to her. She didn't have to let the school know that she got that. But typically speaking, if it's over $1,000 or $1,500, the check's going to be made payable to the institution, so there's no way of getting around it. So don't spend your time looking for crumbs. Okay, how do you apply? This is important. And before I go on to this, I'm just going to take a sip of water so I don't cough. So the FAFSA, that's where everything starts. That's the first financial aid application that everyone has to fill out. Every school, regardless of whether it's public or private, uses the FAFSA in some way, shape, or form. Private schools use it as a secondary application to determine federal student aid and loans. Now, let me rephrase that. Some private schools use it that way. All public schools and most private schools use the FAFSA to determine all aid. There are about 450 schools out there that use the CSS profile, the next one we're going to discuss, to determine full aid. Okay. Up to 60% go in with errors and inconsistencies. More so inconsistencies now than it used to be, again, because the FAFSA has been somewhat simplified than errors. When you go to do a FAFSA, the student and one parent are going to need what's called an FSA ID. It's kind of tough to butcher that, because if you make a mistake when you're creating that, Social Security Administration will kick it out. So at least in the regards of the address and names and dates of birth, Social Security numbers, all that stuff will be pre-filled. But you can certainly make mistakes. I'll tell you how when it comes up in a minute. Everyone has to fill this out to get some form of aid. You cannot apply for federal loans if you do not fill out a FAFSA. So federal Stafford loans, federal plus loans, you cannot get those without filing a FAFSA. Even if you don't have a need, even if it's determined that your student aid index is $5 million, if you want to get a student loan, you still have to file a FAFSA, okay? If it's done wrong, it usually gets bumped, adding another, say, 2 to 4 weeks in processing. That can result in lost financial aid. So everyone must fill out this form to get aid. I'll come back to the errors and inconsistencies in a moment when we talk about the profile. So FAFSA, free application for federal student aid. It's the last time I'm going to say that full name. It's the FAFSA from here on out, okay? And you'd be amazed at how many people butcher the pronunciation of FAFSA. It's actually, I've had somebody call it FAGSFA, and it's really funny. But anyway, so you're going to have to, if you haven't done so already, the student and one parent will need to create what's called an FSA ID. FSA just stands for Federal Student Aid. ID stands for identification. Before completing the FAFSA, you have to have this, okay? Not, if you're a married couple, both don't need an FSA. Only one parent does. They're also unique. So, for example, you can't create one for your son or daughter without using a different email address and cell phone number from yours. So if you tried to use your email address to create yours and then go create theirs, you can't do it. See, it's unique to that. FSA ID is required for the student and one parent. How do you get that? Well, a few years ago, studentaid.gov became the website for all things federal aid, student loans, and everything, all through this. Studentaid.gov is the website you go to create your FSA ID. It is also where you go to file your FAFSA. It is also where you go to get your student loans. So if you want to jot that one down, that's an important one. Okay? CSS profile, very important. And I'm going to talk about how they kind of combine here for a while. CSS profile is run by College Board. So if your sons or daughters have taken the SATs, they probably already have a College Board account. Same user ID and password. Technically, it's an email and a password now. Same website, different sections of that website. Okay, how do they differ? So many private schools, about 450 private schools, and there's 2 public schools that come to mind, University of Michigan and UNC Chapel Hill. Only Chapel Hill. If you want to go to Wilmington, they don't use it. Okay, I'll get to that in a minute. Miami's not, they're private. Yeah. Yeah, typically speaking, if you hear University of, and it has the state name in it, typically that means that it's a public school. If you hear University of and it has the city name, typically that's a private school. Okay. 450 or so schools use the CSS profile to determine your financial aid. So they still require the FAFSA, but the CSS profile becomes the primary. And that's what they're going to use to determine their institutional aid, okay? It's much more detailed than the FAFSA. So what does the FAFSA ask for? The FAFSA asks about, I'm going to simplify it here, what you own and what you earn. It's going to import your information from the IRS, from your tax return, and then it's going to ask you about items that you own, your assets. It's not going to ask you about your retirement assets or your home or anything like that. It's going to ask for what's called assessable assets. I'll get to that a little bit and kind of go through the details of it, but it's relatively simple in what they ask for. The CSS profile, oh, and by the way, your home is not an asset, just so you know. The CSS profile, on the other hand, asks about your home equity. They're going to ask, what year did you buy your house? How much did you pay for it? What is it worth today? What is your current mortgage balance? And how much is your mortgage payment? Interesting. So they can use your home against you in this case. Not every school does. Some do. Okay? They're going to ask much more detailed explanations of income and assets. The FAFSA has been simplified to the point now where it only asks a few questions about your income, and that gets directly imported from the IRS. You never even see it. Even at the end, when you print out it'll say imported from the IRS, imported from the IRS. It's done for identity protection reasons, but suffice to say, if you didn't know what you made, you still wouldn't know what you made by looking at the FAFSA, okay? The CSS profile, on the other hand, needs much more detail. You have to have an actual copy of your tax return in front of you, plus your W-2s and any schedules that might be a part of that. And it's going to ask for you to import that information and type it in manually. There's no importing from the IRS. It's much more difficult. And it's about anywhere from, say, what would you say, Elaine, about 16 to 19 pages on the printout when everything's done? Yeah, so it's pretty detailed on what they ask for. And so if you don't know what you're doing with the CSS profile, if you're not familiar with how a tax return looks, there are instructions on the CSS profile, but I'll tell you, it's still pretty darn confusing. Especially if you own a business, it can get a lot more confusing for people. And if they're not anywhere financially in tune, like they don't know what, I shouldn't say financially in tune, if they're not used to what they're looking at, a CSS profile could take, for somebody who's a neophyte with this, could take them as many as, I don't know, 6 to 10 hours to fill out, and you can get it wrong. That's an interesting one. It has to be consistent with the FAFSA, and this is important here, okay? So while you don't actually see what gets imported from your income information onto the FAFSA, it has to match what's on the CSS profile. So you're relying on the IRS to get it right. So let's hope they do. All the information that you then put in on the CSS profile has to match the FAFSA. This also goes for assets. And this is where it gets interesting. Remember I said that sometimes there's inconsistencies can cause problems? Oftentimes you'll see something where a fat finger makes a mistake. You hit an extra 0 or an extra 2 or something, or a decimal point where it's not supposed to be. If you go to enter your assets in on the FAFSA and say $5,280, and you put in $5,281 on the CSS profile, you could get flagged for verification and an asset verification form, just because you were off by $1. As little as $1. It's crazy. So it has to be consistent. If not, it's going to cause all kinds of problems, and the school's going to go, well, why is this different? And then most people that don't know what they're doing are going to go, I don't know. They don't even understand why they did it. It's not easy to understand and fill out. In fact, it's significantly more difficult to fill out the CSS profile than the FAFSA. The FAFSA probably takes 1/10 of the time to fill out than the CSS profile. Much more complex. You need a lot more information. Here's the crazy thing. The schools that use the CSS profile are going to get the tax information from the FAFSA, which pulls it from the IRS. They're then going to get that same tax information from the CSS profile, which you enter in from your tax return. And then they're going to ask for a copy of that tax return again. Like 3 redundant sources in there. Okay, how is this one filled out? Collegeboard.org. Collegeboard.org. Again, if your son or daughter has taken the SATs, they already have an account. That's where that one gets filled out. So again, if you want to write that one down, that's fine. Okay, some schools have their own institutional form on top of the FAFSA and the CSS profile. Yeah, I hear, oh geez, that was great. So I'll give you an example. University of Pennsylvania, Ivy League school outside of Philly, inside of whatever, in Philly. They use the CSS profile, they use the FAFSA, and they have their own form called a PFAS, Penn Financial Aid Supplement. And guess what? It's the same information that's listed on the FAFSA, and it's listed on the profile, and it's listed on the PFAS. It's redundant information. But guess what? If it's not consistent with the others, it gets kicked out. Now, not every school uses these, but there are schools that do ask for that, and they can have a supplement. If you don't fill it out, you will not get aid. So even if you jump through all the other hoops and get the other applications done, if you don't do that part, you will not get any aid, even if you're eligible for it. Again, has to be consistent, and it's going to ask the same, very similar questions. Okay, some additional forms that might be required. Business and farm supplement. This is if you're filing a CSS profile. Now, for the record, I've been doing this for 26 years, okay? Not once have I ever filled out a farm supplement on Long Island. Not a one. Plenty of business supplements, but not a farm supplement. Although, one of my very good friends from high school, his family owns Schmidt's Farm out in Melville and all over the island. So he owns a farm, but it's a real rarity. I guess if you lived in Kansas or something, it might be much more commonplace. Now, if you're divorced, this is where it gets even more complicated. Oftentimes, the CSS profile doesn't require one. It requires 2 CSS profiles. One for the parent who the student lives with, or the custodial parent, and one for the non-custodial parent, the mom or dad that they don't live with. And guess what? It has to go in, and it has to be consistent. Now, just so you know, oftentimes in divorce, it's contentious. One ex-spouse doesn't want the other ex-spouse to know what they make. The good thing is they don't cross-pollinate. You fill out a CSS profile and your ex fills out a non-custodial profile, you'll never see the information that they filled out. It's completely separate from the two. Now, it's good that they participate with one another, and you would hope that they work in conjunction with one another to get the kids' education taken care of. But sometimes it gets contentious. I had somebody today, and yeah, it happens all the time. I don't want to participate in the process. We get this. I don't want my husband, my ex-husband, or my ex-wife doesn't want to participate in the process. Do you have a relationship with that child? Yes, I do. Well, then the schools are going to require you to participate in the process, whether you'd like to or not. If you do not have a relationship with the ex-spouse, or the child does not have it with their parent, their biological parent, a waiver can be achieved that allows that to not have to be completed. But typically speaking, they're not going to take your word for it. They will require a court document from a judge, a letter from a judge, a school counselor, a member of the clergy, stating that there's no relationship with the biological parent. I did have somebody that was in jail. That was interesting. How do you fill out a form when you're in jail? That was an interesting explanation to the school. Okay, which colleges give you the best shot? So this is important for financial aid purposes, all right? And you're going to see this for those of you that have seniors, you're going to see it sooner rather than later, okay? Some schools meet 100% of a need. What does that mean? Remember, cost of attendance minus student aid index equals your need. So, just a quick example. This is not of any specific school here, but at least it'll give you an idea as far as what it means by this. So if you have a school that costs $40,000 all in, and you have a student aid index of $15,000, you have a $25,000 need at that school. So what does that mean? You get 100%? Well, that means that they're going to give you $25,000 in aid, and the cost of the school is going to be roughly $15,000. However, some schools only meet, let's say 50%, and they kind of slide all over the place. But if you have a $25,000 need and the school only meets 50% of that, that means they're only giving you $12,500. Now you got to add that into your student aid index of 15, so the overall outlay at that school is $27,500, despite the fact that your student aid index says that it's 15. And as I said, some of the schools are more generous, some of the schools are less generous than that. You have to know that before you go applying to school. One question I ask of every client that I speak with first time is, and I'm going to kind of set the precedent for you so you understand it, because it's easier to get this out of the way now, especially for the parents of seniors, and even more so for the parents of juniors. Ask yourself this question if you haven't done so already. How much are you willing to pay for 1 year of education or 4 years of education? Some people say, oh, I could pay $20,000 a year. Some people might say, I'll spend $100,000, or whatever the number might be. I know the numbers are ridiculous. You want to consider that number, and you want to have a pretty hard, fast number on there so that when your son or daughter is applying to these schools, before they start to fall in love with the school, and you buy the pennant, and you buy the sweatshirt and the bumper sticker, you know that you have a realistic expectation of being able to afford the school. So, funny quick story about this one. Going back a long time ago. But I had a student back in 2012, I believe it was. She wanted to become a physical therapist. Parents came to me late. Now, back then, the FAFSA was filed, wasn't available until January 1st. So it was a little bit more compressed, I'll say. And she wanted to go for PT. Now, physical therapy, there's not a ton of schools that have physical therapy. You can't just pick, it's not like going for English or bio or something like that. You have a limited number of schools. So she had already begun to fall in love with certain schools. And the one that she really fell in love with was Sacred Heart University up in Connecticut. It's a beautiful school, beautiful campus. It's absolutely gorgeous. At the time, PT was about a 6-year program, I believe it was. It was a 3-and-3 accelerated. Now I think it's up to 7 for the doctor of physical therapy. So filled out the FAFSA for these people, helped them out with the CSS profile, got everything done. Unfortunately, I don't want to burst anybody's bubble right now, but Sacred Heart's not that much better than that 50% number, okay? And what happened was these parents hadn't considered what the cost of education, or what they could really afford. So they winged it. And what they told their daughter was, well, we'll figure it out, without knowing how much it was going to cost to go there, okay? So they completely, and this is why I want you to start thinking about this. What happened was they came to me in April. It was like April 15th. So they had 2 weeks, just so you know, that financial aid, that's when you decide that you're going, that's when you tell the school. May 1st is typically the day that you tell the school and you send them a deposit. This is where I'm going. So this is about 2 weeks before. They brought me the financial aid package. I looked at it, and I laid it out on the desk and showed them exactly how much it was going to cost for them. I thought the father was going to have a heart attack at the table, and I think the mom had a stroke. They couldn't believe the amount of money. And they had already, the horse was so far out of the barn, it was in another state at this point in time. The father took one look at it and goes, we can't afford this. You can't go there. The look on the daughter's face was as if somebody had just destroyed her world. All of a sudden, this 17-year-old reverted to her 2- and 3-year-old self and started with tears streaming down her eyes. And this is what she did. I kid you not. But you told me I could go, stomping her foot on the floor. It was actually quite uncomfortable for me. Used up a whole box of tissues. It was the most uncomfortable thing, but the parents didn't think about what they could afford, didn't think about what the college was going to cost, and they had ruined their daughter's college dreams right there and then. If anybody wants to find out how that all went down afterwards, come see me. It gets even more interesting, but it'll take too much time to tell the story. All right, you need to know these things before you apply. Okay, percentage of self-help, I know. All right, so there's gift aid and there's self-help. What is gift aid? Gift aid means you don't have to repay it. Gift aid is grants and scholarships. They do not need to be repaid. Self-help, gift aid good, self-help not as good. Still good, but not as good, okay? Gift aid does not need to be repaid. Self-help does. Self-help would be in the form of work studies or federal student loans, okay? Now, some people might consider gift aid to be a federal student loan that's subsidized because they're paying the interest. It's not a bad thing. But if schools meet more in the way of self-help, that means that at the end of the day, when you're done with college, you're going to be paying back more than you would if you were only paying back gift aid, okay? Again, you don't want to find out in June that your package is more in the way of self-help than it was in gift aid, okay? Know before applying. Okay, quick case study here. This is, again, these are, I don't want to say made-up numbers, but they're not exact numbers, okay? Public school, private school. Pretty easy to tell. Public's on the right, private's on the left. School A costs $60,000. Student aid index, $10,000. Your need is $50,000. Again, cost $25,000 at the public, $10,000 student aid index, need 15. So student aid index is the same, regardless of which side of the equation that you're on. School A meets 100% of need. 90% of that is gift aid, 10% self-help. School B meets 60% of need, which means that it's only $9,000 and you're $6,000 short. That number there in the 5, right? And only 50% of it's gift aid, the rest of it's self-help. So, School A has a much higher sticker price than School B. But your total family contribution out of that is $10,000, $45,000 of gift aid, $5,000 of self-help. School B, $10,000 student aid index, unmet need of 6, puts your family contribution at 16, and oh, by the way, only $4,500 of it is gift aid. So, School A has a higher sticker price. School B has a higher net price. Pretty wild, right? Okay. Doesn't always work that way, but it oftentimes can work out that you'll see that private schools can be less expensive than state schools, especially out-of-state state schools. Okay. So the family B actually pays $6,000 more out of pocket to attend a cheaper school. Pretty crazy, right? So you go to buy a car. You look at the window sticker. Do you pay the window sticker, or do you look at the discounts that you're going to get from it? For those of you that are old enough to remember, there was a commercial, and I'm 54, so I'm old enough to remember. They used to say that Honda was the car that sold itself, okay? And they had this depressed salesman that would walk up, and he wanted to work hard to make a sale, but because it was the car that would sell itself, he'd walk up and he'd say hello, and he'd introduce himself, and the person would go, "I'll take it," okay? Well, nobody really does that when it comes to college, okay? So if you look at the sticker price, do you focus on the sticker price or do you focus on the net price? With colleges, it's the same way. You want to focus on what you're actually going to pay out of pocket, not what it says on the sticker. Definitely look at that. but know which ones are going to be generous. Okay. How about negotiating? Did you know that you can negotiate with colleges to get the price down? Doesn't work at every single school, but oftentimes you can do an appeal based on your circumstances that will allow you to potentially have the college lower their initial financial aid award. Or, I'm sorry, raise their initial financial aid award, lower your out-of-pocket costs, okay? Negotiation is very important when it comes to schools, especially because nowadays colleges use, or the FAFSA uses and the CSS profile, both use what's called prior year determination from taxes. What does that mean? Prior year. For those that are seniors, you're using your 2024 taxes, despite the fact that when your son or daughter goes to school, it's going to be 2026 and 2027. Because of that, things might have changed. Maybe you retired. Maybe you got a new job. Maybe your income went down. God forbid, maybe you had a death of a family member or a disability. They don't know that because they're looking at tax returns from 2 years ago. Or another way that you can appeal, maybe you got a better offer from a different school. I'll give you an example. Adelphi, Malloy, NYIT, St. John's, Hofstra, they all kind of travel in the same orbit. They all reach for the same students. They all try and get the same type of students there. If you get a better offer from Hofstra or from St. John's, you can bring that offer to the other schools and potentially have them match that. Now, typically speaking, you have to negotiate down, not up, or laterally. If you take an award from St. John's to Cornell, Cornell will say, have a nice day. No offense to St. John's, but they'll just say that they're a better school. In fact, Cornell has a form, and there's a box on it that says, why are you appealing? And one of the options is you got a better award from another school. And then there's a little asterisk next to it, and it says, please note, if this offer is not from one of the other 7 Ivy League schools, Duke, Stanford, or MIT, don't bother, okay? So you can negotiate to get a better deal from some of these schools. Not everybody will flex, but oftentimes they can, and they will. Just for the record, when you are negotiating, what I will tell is be nice. Don't be mean. Don't go in there kicking and screaming and calling them all kinds of nasty names because they didn't give you what they want, because that's not going to help your case. Some schools miss award. Most schools under award on the first shot, and they will try and compete with other schools. You need to know if that first award is the best. Look, there are times when I tell people, look, take it, absolutely take it and run. Take the money and run. But oftentimes, you know, if they don't meet what your need is, you can appeal to potentially get more money. And again, that bottom one's really important. You must know how to talk to these people in the financial aid offices. Begging and pleading, kicking and screaming does not work. Right? Threatening their firstborn does not work either. Okay, so you can possibly rearrange your affairs, because remember what I talked about before about your income and your assets? Those things can actually impact your financial aid. Okay, here's some of your assets that don't count on the FAFSA. Your home equity does not count. Primary residence, that's where you live. Retirement plans, your 403B, your 401K, your 457 plans, your IRAs, do not count and do not get listed on the FAFSA. If you list them, they will not correct it, and you will screw yourself over, okay? Cash value life insurance, again, annuities do not count. Businesses with greater than 100 employees do not count either, okay? Ownership of assets. So these would be assessable assets, assets that actually count. So a lot of times parents have what's called a custodial account. These are accounts that are in the kid's name with the parent as the guardian, versus having the money in the parent's name. So if the student has the money in their name, in a UGMA or an UPMA account, the FAFSA is going to subtract, or they're going to basically penalize you 20% for every dollar that you have in their name. So if you have $20,000 in their name, they just lost $4,000 of financial aid eligibility, okay? If it was in mom and dad's name, it's only 5.6%. That means that they only lost $1,120 of financial aid eligibility. Big difference, right? Now imagine you expand that number even further. Okay. Oftentimes, people are going to ask this question: what is 529 plans have become very prevalent in how they used to pay for college? 529 plans are treated as an asset of the parent. Okay, they're not a student asset, despite the fact that you might think they are. Students are beneficiaries; they are not owners. Okay. So, just before I back up, so I said before, those are your non-assessable assets. I'm going to go through quickly. What are your assessable assets? It's not up here on the screen. I accidentally deleted the slide. But admit it, it's my fault. Assessable assets would be your cash, your savings, your checking, your money markets, your CDs, your brokerage accounts that are not retirement-based. You might mentally think of them as retirement-based, but if they are not tax qualified, meaning that you can use it for anything and not pay a penalty to the IRS, Those are assessable assets. It says home equity. If you own a second home, a vacation home or a rental, those are considered assessable assets. If you have art or something like that, they're not going to know about it. Basically, if it shows up on a tax return, it's an assessable asset, okay? If it doesn't show up on a tax return, hey, a non-assessable asset. Okay, so what have we learned tonight? There's a ton of false, misleading, and incorrect information about college funding and the financial aid process. There are literally billions of dollars available through various government and private grants, scholarships, loans, and work-study programs. The FAFSA forms are often filled out incorrectly and late when families send them in, creating costly delays and or a loss of money that you would have been eligible for if you had done them correctly the first time. Okay. Most public schools use only the FAFSA. Private schools can require additional forms, and confusing, with asking for a lot more financial information. Financial aid is dished out on a first-come, first-served basis. Once their allotment of aid is gone, it's gone. Some schools historically provide more aid than others. For those of you that want to know, talk to me. I'll let you know which ones are more generous than others. Yeah, I'm not going to give you a list of all 4,000 schools in the country, but suffice to say, I do, been doing this a long time. I know who's generous and who's not. And just like buying a car, you usually have to haggle to get a good deal. I know, it's crazy. Did anybody think that you could negotiate with schools? I mean, most people don't think they can until they get to that point when they see the bill and they go, ooh, maybe I could do something about this. All right, so thanks for joining us this evening. I'm going to open it up for the Q&A session right now. My contact information is here. For those of you that wish to talk about this maybe a little bit further, feel free to give me a call. Myself or Elena will be happy to give you a complimentary time slot where we'll talk about the financial aid system, maybe about your circumstances. But there's no cost to that. You learn a little bit more about the process. But with that in mind, if there is a comment card in there, if you liked what I said tonight, give me a nice rating. If you didn't like what I said tonight, don't hand it in. No, I'm only kidding. No, I like to know what I do well and what I don't do well. So if you want to hand it in, that's great. I would really appreciate it. But feel free to stop by the website or give us a call or something like that. So with that in mind, I'd like to open it up for your Q&A. Sir, yes, I'll get to everybody, I promise. Correct. The TAP? So the question is, if you have a tax-exempt pension, could be a police, firefighter, teacher, something along those lines. It's not taxable to the state, but they still know about it. So it will count against you. Yeah, okay? So it'll still be counted. Years ago, you get away with it, but now it flows through to the tax return. They know about it. So it will count against you. So you're still not paying tax, but yeah. Sorry, you had a question? Was there somebody? Yes, great question. So FAFSA has to be filed every single year that you have a son or daughter in school, including grad school. CSS profile, maybe. If you're going to a state school, TAP has to be filled out every single year. CSS profile, about 25% of the schools that require it in the first year require it in subsequent years, but not everybody. Sometimes what they do, like Boston College, for example, drops the CSS profile after year 1 and then requires their own form that they don't require in year 1 in years 2, 3, and 4. So CSS profile, possibly. FAFSA and TAP, yes, every year it has to be filed. Great question. There's somebody over here. I'll get to you, I promise. Yes? Unfortunately, if it's their own institutional form, you have to go on their own website. Yeah, they'll give a breakdown. So if you go to the school's website, it'll tell you, it'll say how to apply, and then it'll give a list of what you need to fill out. Yes, sir, in the back there. Okay. Of the need met? Okay. So the question was, filled out an application for 15 schools. How do you find out what your student aid index is? And then how do you find out how generous those schools are? All right, so a couple of parts to that. So the student aid index is determined after the FAFSA is processed. So once it's processed, you'll get an email that says that your FAFSA was completed. So give it about a week or two, and then you should be able to log on. It used to be something that was called a SAR, a student aid report. They kind of eliminated the student aid report, but it's on the FAFSA website under the account details. You'll be able to see it. It takes a couple of weeks to see what it would be, though. It doesn't just pop up automatically. It used to pop up as soon as you finish the FAFSA, but it'll show up what that is. You could also, if you wanted to, you could do an estimator. So even if you did your FAFSA, you can enter in a couple of pieces of information, and it'll give you an estimated student aid index as well. So for those of you that maybe want to use a net price calculator, it'll do the same thing. As far as which schools are generous, the schools don't always publish that information and say, hey, we're not generous. It doesn't work that way. I'll give you an example. There's a school in New York City that has the name of the city in their name, and they're a university. So you can maybe gather whom I'm talking about, okay? They're cheap, and I don't mean cheap in a good way. Oh, wow, that's really cheap. No. Oh, that's really cheap. That's cheap. That's what they are. They are not generous at all. They're not going to say that on their website. They're just not. I hate to say it. I mean, like, we have that information only because I have, like, experience from years and years and years. If you ask me about a school in Iowa, I'm probably not going to know, just because, simply put, there's not as many people apply to those types of schools. There are some, you can go on the net price calculator, though. The net price calculator should give you at least a starting point of an idea as to where you would look as far as what you might be eligible to receive. It's not always 100% accurate. Yes, ma'am. TAP's pretty straightforward. There's one piece of information that you need to know from the TAP application. It is your New York State taxable income. It's line 37 of your IT-201. So your New York State tax return, I'm oversimplifying, but that's the number that you need from that determines TAP. The rest of it's pretty, I mean, you have to have your name, your date of birth, that kind of stuff. The one thing about TAP that's a little screwy, FAFSA and the CSS profile allow for, not unlimited, the FAFSA allows for 20 schools. CSS profile is unlimited, but the TAP application, unfortunately, only allows one school at a time, and it typically pulls the first New York State, or first school in the state of New York that's on your FAFSA. So if you complete the FAFSA, you can go back in and do the TAP a week or two later, and if you put Adelphi first, it's going to put Adelphi on that application. Every school will then award you a TAP, estimated TAP, but if you don't go to Adelphi and you go to SUNY Cortland, you'll lose that TAP award unless you go back into the TAP application and put the correct school on there. It's a little flaw in the system. There's only one school that's listed at a time. It'll say estimated until. I'm sorry, what do you mean by that? If they're completely different, yeah. Even though the systems are linked, they're separate. I know that sounds weird, but you can go right to the, so what'll happen when you go to log in, you have to create a separate username and PIN for the TAP, but it will, it'll recognize that you filed a FAFSA based on your social security number. So, and then that's how it knows to pull that school from there. But it's complete, the systems are separate because the federal money, and it's federally based on your taxes. The TAP is based on your New York State taxes. Completely different system. So it's not that, it won't pull that information. Because your number could be completely, this gentleman before said, is taxable income because the teacher has lower, it doesn't show. Fine. It's still, eventually you're just going to make sure that you have to put the school that you choose has to be on it. Okay? Yes, ma'am. I'm going to get to everybody, I promise. Okay, that's a great question. The question was, when is the first day that you can file the FAFSA? As of now, the technical date is October 1st of their senior year. So if you have a junior, you got until October 1st of next year. This year it actually opened a little bit early. If you're a parent of a senior, you can already work on it. October 1st is both the FAFSA and the CSS profile. TAP, I wait a few weeks. Again, you need to process your FAFSA first. Okay? Nope. Typically, it's on each individual school's website. Yeah, and College Board has their own version of it as well. Yeah, so another question. Yes, ma'am. God bless you. Yep, absolutely. So if you have multiple students in school, whether they're twins or not, the question is can you be the parent for both of them on the form? The answer is yes. You're considered a contributor. The parent is considered a contributor now to the FAFSA. So I would actually recommend that you use the same parent. Just it makes it simpler to do it. With the CSS profile, it's going to require both parents' information. So there's no separate login for the parents on the profile, but it's going to ask for all the, like everybody in the household is going to ask their information, what schools they go to, what, the younger children, and so on and so forth. Does that answer your question, ma'am? Yes, sir. Correct. So the question is that it has to be applied every year, and it's a 2-year look back. So what it does, and this is it. Let me address this a little clearly. So the FAFSA and the CSS profile look back 2 years. They use what they call prior year processing. It's a lot of P's, but prior year processing to determine financial aid. So for parents that are seniors or students that are seniors right now, they're looking at your 2024 taxes, both the profile, the TAP, and the FAFSA, okay? That's for income and only income. What they ask about for your assets are as of the day of application. So you fill out the FAFSA for income that you might have earned at this point almost 2 years ago, but they want to know what your assets are on the date that you filed your application. Beat you to it then. How about that? Okay. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, so if you have, again, in a case like that, where if you have money that's set aside for a specific goal, whether it's home, repair, whatever it would be, something like that, technically, if you have that money in your account as of the date that you file, yeah, if you do the home improvement, and you write that check to the contractor the day before you file the FAFSA, that would be a good thing. Sometimes it's a little wonky in how they report it because, honestly, they don't know about the assets unless it shows up on a tax return. And if it's sitting in your bank account and it's earning interest, that's how they know that it's there. But if that's part of the other problem. Maybe this is one case where it can actually help you. Maybe it came into that money in 2025. It doesn't show up on a tax return. They don't know about it. Again, but technically, it's supposed to be as of the date of application. So if you're going to use those funds, use them now. Like some people might say with the custodial accounts I talked about in the kids' names before, custodial accounts can be used for anything. There's no restriction. It doesn't have to be used for college. You want to buy a car or send them on a trip, go right ahead. You could do that. So if you want to take that money out of there and buy them a car, you could do that, and then the car doesn't count, or the trip doesn't count. But if it's in the account, technically it's supposed to be listed. Okay? Yes, ma'am. Great question. So the question is, when does the financial aid package come? The answer is after you're accepted at the college. So, for example, if you apply to 10 schools, you could have different dates that you get accepted. So long as you have all your financial aid ducks in a row and you've done your financial aid applications, got them copies of the tax returns or anything that they require at that point in time, you won't receive any financial aid information, any kind of financial aid package until they're accepted to the school. They're never going to give you an award package if they're going to reject you. But once you're accepted and you have everything in a row, typically speaking, depending upon how late it is in the process, it could be anywhere from, say, with the acceptance letter or online or whatever, to as much as a month afterwards, depending upon the school. But you won't receive anything until after you've actually been accepted at the school. If you're talking about a top school like an Ivy League, you're not going to get notified until, like if it's regular decision, you won't get notified until like March 30th. And then you have to tell them that you're going there by May 1st. They're going to get you the financial aid package like right away because you got crunch time. You got to make a decision whether or not you can actually afford it. But I would advise you really need to know what you're going to get before you get it. So that this way you can make that decision and don't turn into the "you told me I could go" scenario again. Yes, anybody else? Questions? Nothing? Oh, go ahead, follow up. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. Okay. Not necessarily. So the question is that if you've already been accepted to school, you've gotten some awards already, maybe in the form of academic awards. Frank, do they do on-sites here? Like any? Oh yeah. So some of the local schools, so oftentimes they'll come in, they'll look at your transcript, and they'll say, "Hey, we'll offer you this." Oftentimes, with an acceptance letter, you will get an academic scholarship. Like it'll come at the same time, but it doesn't necessarily happen that way. It does happen a lot, but not all the time. Just because you didn't get one doesn't mean that you won't. But if you really want to determine how and if you're eligible to receive a scholarship from the institution, A, they oftentimes publish the information on their website, and B, look at the criteria to get in. If you just got in under the wire and you squeaked in, chances are you're not getting an academic scholarship. To get the big academic scholarships, you need to be the big fish in the little pond. If you're the little fish in the big ocean, chances are you're not going to get them. And there are schools out there that don't offer academic scholarships. The Ivy League schools, Boston College, Georgetown, things like that. How do you differentiate between 204 averages? You really can't. So they don't give academic awards. And the Ivy Leagues don't even give athletic awards. So, but they give very, very generous need-based grants. Okay? So not all hope is lost, but you can do the research and look yourself and see if, you know, where they fit in the criteria for getting into the school. Again, if the average person that gets in is an 88 and your son or daughter has a 95, chances are you're going to get a good academic award. If it's the other way around, well, then probably don't count on it, okay? Any other questions? Yes, sir. Okay. It was like eeny, meeny, miny, mo kind of? Okay. It's a great question. And you know what? I should have addressed that, and I'm glad you brought that up. The question is, can you fix them? So I'll say this. For the FAFSA, you can. You can make corrections to a FAFSA electronically. Not a problem. You make a mistake, go back in and you can do it. You may have to answer why. Again, it could be that fat finger where, you know, you put 50,000 instead of 5,000. Not a problem. You may just have to explain yourself. With the CSS profile, however, this is why I say get it done right the first time. CSS profile does not have electronic corrections. So, if you screw up the profile, what do you do? Some might say that you bend over and kiss your rear end goodbye. Not quite. What I will say is that you have to print out the profile, hard copy, anywhere between 16 and 19 pages, find out what your mistake was, cross it out, white out it, put in the right number, initial it, and then mail it to the school or fax it or email it to the school, to every school that you apply to. So if you did 10 schools, you got to do that 10 times, okay? Now, if you're adding additional schools, so for example, if you have another school that you're applying to with the CSS profile, that maybe just, my son or daughter, you know what, I want to apply to this school. They add it on afterwards, and you've already submitted it. You can correct it then, but only to that school. The other schools don't get the, and once they get it, that's it, okay? Of course, yeah. So if you're unclear as to whether you did it right or not, can you at least have somebody, yeah, I mean, like, you could show it to me, and I would look at it, and I can go, oh, yeah, maybe you made a mistake here, or you made a mistake there. Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's the problem with the profile. The profile has, they've updated the look of the website, but it's literally the same exact pain in the rear end that it's been for the last 25 years. You make a mistake, and I've seen it happen a lot of times. You make a mistake on it, it's difficult to fix. And that's not impossible, but it's a lot more difficult to fix than the FAFSA. Same for the tab. Tab can be fixed electronically as well. Okay? Some things can be fixed electronically, not everything. Any other questions? Yes, sir, in the back. Not might, they will be. Yes. So the question is do they require the tax returns for the CSS profile? First off, if you're filling out the CSS profile, you'll need to have a copy handy. Yeah, just so to enter that information. The vast majority of schools that require the CSS profile also require you to send a copy of that tax return to them, whether it's directly to them or through a process called IDOC, which is part of the College Board system. It's more of a centralized system to get the tax returns to them. You can upload them and send them in. If you Google IDOC, just be careful. Sometimes the first thing that comes up is the Illinois Department of Corrections. That's not what you're looking for, okay? But the IDOC system allows multiple schools to get it at once. But I would think of it this way. If you're applying to schools with the CSS profile, just assume that you're going to have to send them a copy of the tax return. Typically, if you file a CSS profile, you click submit. If it's the IDOC process, you'll get an email that night that says that the IDOC portal is open. If you don't, not every school participates in IDOC, but what you can do is go on your son or daughter's portal, their school portal, not Wantagh, but I'm talking about the actual college portal, and you can find out what their admission status is and what their financial aid status. It'll tell you what's missing. If not, go on the school's financial aid website, and it'll give you a list of what's required. And it'll then start to notify you that, hey, we're missing this, or hey, we're missing this. The students have to be diligent about this. This is one, I know the parents sometimes like to get involved, but if the students don't check their email, this is one where it could hurt them. Make sure, I know they're all about TikTok and all the other stuff and texting. The truth of the matter is they got to be very diligent about that, because if they miss it and you don't do that, you will not get financial aid. It doesn't matter if all you're missing is a W-2. They will not provide you aid even if you're eligible for a ton of money. Okay? Any other questions, folks? I don't have the lottery numbers, so don't ask, okay? Thank you very much for everybody for coming out tonight. I appreciate Wantagh bringing us in. If anybody has any questions or wants to talk a little further about it, you know, maybe they have a question that privately they don't want to discuss in front of the group, feel free to give us a call, send us an email. We'll be happy to help you out. Thanks, everybody, and have a great night. For those that want to talk to us, we offer both in-person, virtual, Zoom, and phone calls. So